Can you hear that in the background?
Mm-hmm.
The banging?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, shit.
Hello everyone and welcome back to this week's Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton and I'm joined by the wonderful Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. So this week...
And the banging in the background.
And the bangs in the background. Yes, look, we decided to bring a third guest. That
a little bit of grace today, guys.
Yeah, a bit of home improvement
Yes.
coming as well. And for those of you old enough, there will be no "oh" with this home improvement. Anyway, so today's episode is going to be an interesting one. Like we've just sort of, had a chat off.
It'll be banging.
It'll be banging. It will be banging. It's going to be about what we see, what we perceive.
And it feels so real and so true.
Yeah, but how that might differ with or without emotion, with or without perspective, with or without trauma, with or without just, but it's going to be an interesting one because I think we're going to dance between what you're seeing and feeling, which would feel as real as anything that you've felt, versus what's actually playing out now. But
the objective reality.
Yeah, but and how to discern what those two things are, if you can at all, because everything that we see is from our perspective. So how do you question it without feeling loopy? So lucky we have one doctor on this show that can help us go through that. I look forward to it. Over to you, Ash.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so how funny is this, right? Just as you were talking then, I was reminded, this is literally only as recent as less than a week ago. I was in Sydney over the weekend and I had to obviously pack some bags to take to Sydney, and we have someone who cooks for us once a fortnight. So my kids have dietary requirements and allergies and stuff. So just to ease the mental load of trying to work around so many different allergies and intolerances and preferences and all that kind of stuff, I have someone who comes and cooks for them, which then eases the burden. That stuff goes in the freezer, and on the nights we have late therapy appointments or, after school activities or whatever, we pull it out of the freezer and there's an easy dinner. Anyway, wow. Our amazing, helpful cook had been, and there were all these containers in the fridge full of beautiful food. And I can't tell you how many times, this is really bad, and I'm so sorry for the people out there who are very waste conscious and very, planetary, worried and concerned. But I can't tell you the number of times where purely because we haven't put the containers into the freezer soon enough, we've had to throw the food out.
Oh.
And it burns me every time. Anyway, we've been really good. Well, when I say we, because I just took responsibility for doing it. But a number of times I had been away and the food never made it into the freezer. And I used to feel really resentful and frustrated towards my husband for that. And it was so interesting because I know that it's not something he sees, and it's not out of malice. It's not like he wakes up in the morning and goes, oh, gee, how can I really grind her today? I know I'll not put the food in the freezer. That'll do it. Like, that's not real. It's not happening. But it's just something that's not on his radar. It's not in his, in his structure of reality. He just doesn't even see it. And so I used to find myself getting really frustrated and resentful towards him for not doing it. And this really interesting thing happened where, as I was packing my bags to go to Sydney, I opened the fridge to make myself a coffee and grab the oat milk out, and I saw all these containers of food in there. And guess what I did? I shut the fridge. And I went back and I kept packing, and I was like, I found myself already anticipating the frustration and anger that I would feel towards him, because I will bet you any money I'm going to come home on Monday and those bloody containers are still going to be in the fridge, and then I'm going to have to put that food in the bin, and I'm going to have to do this, and I'm going to be so pissed at him. And it's like Wednesday the week before, And I go, what? Why? Why did I just close the fridge? Why didn't I just put the contain? I'm the one who saw it. Why didn't I just put the containers into the freezer and be done with it? And
I still want
then
to know if you made the
that
coffee.
whole scenario, yeah, I made the coffee, of
Okay,
course.
good. Good, good, good.
But then the whole scenario is avoided entirely, and it was so mind blowing to me because again, it's another example of a scenario that we play out because I that's a familiar pattern for us, and it gave my unconscious mind evidence of a story. And so unconsciously what we do is we act or don't act, we say or don't say, we speak up or don't speak up, we well, I mean, I've just said the same thing three different ways. We communicate or don't communicate, we ask for help or we don't ask for help, and all of those behaviors are driven by our unconscious stories and our need to recreate the same situations for us to experience the same thing, like to literally prove itself right. It's a closed loop. And so this was a loop that we had been on where I was unconsciously setting my husband up for failure and unconsciously manifesting situations for me to feel resentment and frustration that didn't have to be there. And if I didn't have that awareness and I went to Sydney, came home on the Monday, and the same thing played out, this played out a number of times before, I would have seen with absolute certainty and absolute conviction that my husband was the problem and that this was all his fault, and that would have been so real to me. But yet unconsciously I set him up for failure and I created the situation by seeing it and allowing the whole thing to play out, which would have been as predictable as breathing.
Which
Like
we
I would have
always like
bet my house
predictability,
that it would have
don't
played out
we?
that way. We do. And so one of the interesting things that happens is when we have belief systems, when we have stuff that's playing in our unconscious mind, when we have wounding, when we have emotions stored in the body, we start to consciously or unconsciously manifest the experiences to prove it right. And I see that so often in my world, so often in our world. And so, yeah. Have you observed any behaviors like that in you? Or am I the only crazy person here?
Oh, no, 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 no. I mean, I guess, and this is interesting, I can see it more in others at the moment, and I'm just wondering, is that because I'm not aware, I'm not looking for it myself or not? But I've been, I guess right at the moment, I see it more in others. So in the past, I've been very conscious of when I do like an internal debrief of a situation, I can be very critical of others, and that same criticism now combined with my awareness comes back to me a whole lot more. So previously, go back before the healing journey, that critical lens was always shining outwards, because I'd always felt that the reason I felt this way was because I was wronged. So I was always just looking outwards. There's no need to look in, because by default, the reason I felt this way is because someone else has done something wrong, something wasn't fair, everything was circumstantial on the outside. So therefore, the critical view was out there. Cue the healing journey, and then suddenly that has to turn from out there to all inside. And so I'd be going through a lot of critical, I suppose, reflection, and it all started with just being aware of ego. And I've said it in the past, like even just my everyday thoughts when I would be meeting or looking or just existing, like let's just say driving or walking down the road, I'd be looking at people and judging. Am I better than them? Do I feel as though they're dumber than me? Or if I'm talking like, but it wasn't, and at the time I didn't think it was a bad thing. It was just sort of being observant. But it was actually the ego constantly shuffling where I fitted in the place. But that turned from, it was just something like breathing into something like, holy shit, dude, you're constantly judging. You're constantly in your ego. And that there was never going to be found unless that sort of critical thinking turned inward. And from there, it just kept on building. From general situations, then into, okay, if I was in a situation, regardless if it was the other person was right or wrong, fair or unfair, reasonable or reasonable, I would look at how did I react? And if I felt as though I was saying, well, I did it because I had to put the brakes on. Because now I'm justifying a behaviour that I didn't particularly like. But it had to be justified because, well, you know. And so that turned into, yes, I was triggered. Yes, there was a catalyst. But I could have done better because of that, regardless of what the situation was. And so now, going through all of these points, it's now come to, while I still have that critical thinking within me, on me, I see it more in others, because I'm also now seeing that if I can be with someone that has the similar critical thinking, then we never get into big blow-up arguments, or I don't get triggered as much, which is great. It's a bit like sort of, you know, however, when you don't, then you have to really, I suppose, bridge a gap. Now, if you do or don't, that's up to you. And I don't always bridge the gap. And so when I don't bridge the gap, I look at on myself. But for the most part, when I'm seeing it in others, again, it's not coming from a judgment, it's coming from a sense of observation. Because I'm not probably at the place where it's sort of like, I love it and I'm indifferent, right? It's observation. Where I want to be in the future is coming at it at full-blown empathy, because I know that when I come at it with full-blown empathy, that comes with acceptance. And acceptance, and this is a big thing that I've been seeing, people confuse acceptance with tolerance. Because tolerance has to be worked on. Acceptance is like breathing. It's like water. It's like it just is. And so no matter what happens over there, it has no effect on you, because it just is. Like there's a tree outside your house, Ash, and minding its own business, and it doesn't matter, right? So I'm getting to that place. I'm not there yet. But there's a lot of times where I see it and go, okay, if I can accept it, then everything's good. If I tolerate it, it means I can act better, but it takes a whole lot more work. A bit like the fake it till you make it kind of thing. And then there's I'm triggered. And if I'm not at full capacity, then there's something to learn from that. And so I definitely see in others, and what I wish for others is if they could go through that same journey. But we're all at different parts of that. Some people don't. Some people never will. Not this lifetime. Some people will. Some people are starting. Some people are yet to start, but are on their way to starting. And some people are already there and done and dusted. And so I guess for me, while I see it in others, that's important, because you need to understand where you need to bridge the gap when you don't have full and complete acceptance of everything that's going on at any single time. And I don't think anyone's going to get to that point. I mean, maybe. I still got a long way to go. But certainly when you start to look at that critical thinking on yourself, then, you know, that's where it's going to be incredible. Because I tell you what, until you start taking that awareness inside, then you're never going to see it. It's like a room in the house that you've never seen. It doesn't have a door. It simply doesn't exist until you suddenly trip over it one day. And until then,
I like
everything.
to refer to it as the bottom drawer. Like, you know,
Yeah.
every kitchen has the bottom drawer with the junk that just
Yep.
doesn't belong anywhere else.
Yep.
Yeah. That's what
Absolutely.
it's like the stuff you can have the most put together house. You can have spotless, it can be absolutely immaculate show home level house, but there's going to be one of those drawers everywhere. And that's the stuff. That's the stuff. So much gold in what you just shared. Oh my goodness. And something that came up for me was being the narrative around acceptance is so powerful, because if we, not you, but if we as a collective stopped making things wrong or bad and stopped judging things and simply accepted them for exactly as they were and responded instead of made them wrong and reacted to the wrongness of it, life changes. And so, you know, I think of examples of in our relationship, in our business, in our home, like parenting even. There's been times when my child has had massive tantrums, it just exploded, been really upset over something that's completely irrational, but in her world, it's real. And in her sense of reality, based on what her eyes have seen and her mind has interpreted, that has created this big emotional experience. And one of the greatest gifts that came into my parenting and my relationship has been making it okay, making her experience okay, because the emotion that she's experiencing in that moment is real. The only thing that's real is her reaction or response to what's happening.
Absolutely.
And so the difference between judging it and making it wrong versus accepting it and allowing it to be as it is determines whether I react because I want it to be right. It's got to change in order for me to be okay, or I respond. And the power of response in this is, you know, I like to sit there and go, hypothetically, if it were true, let's say she feels unloved and something feels unfair because she's perceiving something. Like, let's say I won't buy her a lollipop. And to
Sure.
her, I don't love her and it's not fair and I'm the worst
Yep.
mum in the world. Now, and she's very emotional about the fact that I wouldn't buy her the lollipop that she so desperately wants. Now, the emotional response she's having to me not buying her the lollipop is not bad. It's real based on her perception and her experience of that situation. But her emotional response doesn't mean I have to react and make it wrong. Doesn't mean that I have to then go and get the lollipop just so that her emotions go away. It's not a problem to be solved. It's an experience to sit with, to be present with. And so allowing her the space to feel the emotions in response to what's actually happening is the first step, because I can't sit there, even if I rationally stood there and argued with her and said, this is the reason, all the reasons why you're wrong for seeing it that way. It's actually this way, and this is the truth, and this is what's right, and you're seeing it wrong. I completely deny her experience, but she's so heightened and so dysregulated that the rational part of her brain is offline anyway. And so that's going to be met with, like, it's not going to get us anywhere. And I recently had an experience where someone was deep in a feeling experience with big emotions. And I found myself, I literally observed myself wanting to argue, wanting to fight back. And initially I did. And then as soon as I just sort of came over me of recognizing fighting back, they're not hearing anything that I'm saying. They're not able to receive any of my side of the story or my logic or my thought process or my reality. They just need to be heard and witnessed in theirs. And so, was it hard? Yeah, it was hard. But at the same time, that's the healthiest thing we can do, is make the emotions that someone is feeling okay. Even if it feels unfair, even if there's a part of you that wants to jump in and defend yourself or whatever. And that, I'm not perfect at it. And sometimes I do take the bait, and sometimes I do still jump into self-defense. But at the end of the day, like with my daughter, no one benefits from me telling her off. No one. No one benefits from it. I mean, I might benefit in the short term because I don't have to deal with the outward outburst of emotion. But reinforcing all the time, time after time, that her perspective is wrong, and trying to convince her that my perspective is right, it actually doesn't help anyone. And when there is an absence of acceptance of what is, there's only ever going to be reaction. And so we're always looking at the same thing with our own lens. You know, I see this in clients a lot, where one person will work because they're trying to provide for their family and trying to keep a roof over their head, and they're loving their family the best way that they can in that moment, the best way that they have access to, the best way they know how. And maybe that's just because that's how they're programmed. Maybe it's because there's a circumstances around it, like, you know, maybe they're in financial crisis, and so that financial crisis drives them to work more to try and uphold that. But that's their version of reality. But their partner may not see it that way. Their partner sees it as, you're never around, you don't love me, you're not here. If you loved me, you would be at home with me, and work is more important. And so, you know, I just had this, I must have had the same conversation 3 times over the weekend. And that is that the truth of reality sits somewhere in the middle. But you have 2 people with their own perspectives and their own wounding and their own fears and their own stuff that's overlaying that exact same thing that sits in the middle. It's the 6 and the 9 thing again, where this person's over here going, I do love you, and that's why I'm working my ass off, and that's why I'm you know, working 16 18-hour days. I'm doing it because I love you. And this person is seeing the exact same thing, going, you don't love me because you work 16 hours a day, and if you loved me, then you would. And so that's honestly this whole, I know we've recorded an episode before about what did you hear that I didn't say, and this episode, I think it's episode 17, I could be wrong, maybe double check that, but this episode is really related to that, except it's not what we're hearing, it's sort of what we're perceiving as a bigger picture.
It's what's getting triggered within you. And I really do like all of these analogies around acceptance, because it's really important when you sort of talk about, and I think dynamics is a key in all of this that changes an outcome. So for argument's sake, a parent and a child, you know, we're not expecting the child to have the, let's just say, the function, the ability, the knowledge, the awareness of an adult. Otherwise, I wouldn't need parents, right? So there's that dynamic of, okay, it's reasonable that if someone's having a big emotion over a lollipop, that we can sort of understand and empathise. Now, let's fast forward that child to a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, right? And that lollipop is a car, right? And it happens once a year. I want a new car. Cry about it if you don't get it, right? Suddenly that changes. Okay. All right. So you can be as present, you can be as understanding, but there's something else at play. So, and then we can take it even further. Okay. You have a relationship with someone, whether it be a family member or a close colleague you have to work with, that does it, say, every 2 weeks, right? And you bring, I'll say from my example, you bring tolerance with a bit of acceptance, right? You're trying, but mostly tolerance, because that person can trigger you. Good, right? And then it's sort of like, okay, so you keep on going, do you? Well, I mean, at that point, if there's the ability for you to be able to share, I see a 6 even though you see a 9, and that person goes, I understand you see a 9 where I see a 6, then we're starting to get some mutual ground. But if it's
Yeah, except it's
one-sided,
not reasonable to expect that when there's emotion. And I
yes.
think that's where a lot of people get it wrong. So, in the example I just gave, when I had started to participate in defending myself, the person on the other end of that was not in that moment. And I'm not saying the person doesn't have the
Mm,
capacity, but I'm saying in the moment, because the part of their brain required to be present for the conversation is completely not accessible to them.
okay.
So
So, but
that's kind of what
what
I'm getting
happens if
at.
it's
Someone,
continual and
yes, well, then if it's
you're actually not
continual,
making progress? It's just the same thing on repeat. They're sort of like you can be
yeah.
as accommodating or tolerant, but at some point there needs to be, right?
Well, there
Except,
needs to be a capacity for both people to have the conversation as a follow up. And I have a track record enough with the person involved in this that I
mm,
know that once things have calmed down, once we are both back in our bodies, we'll be able to navigate that in a much healthier way.
mm,
But we wouldn't have gotten to the point of being able to navigate in a healthy way before the emotional process. And so that's there's people who don't have the capacity to navigate that in a healthy way. So it's
mm,
kind of reminding me a little bit of the fixed versus growth mindset thing, because someone with a fixed mindset is just going to keep having tantrums and nothing changes. So in a
correct.
debrief process, you've got, what were you trying to achieve? Did you achieve it or not? What were the
Mm,
reasons you didn't achieve it? And then what's the response? So what are you learning from this? What are you going to do differently next
mm,
time? Now, someone with a fixed mindset is just going to stop at the reasons. And the reasons are going to be mostly about you.
yep.
It's going to be mostly everything around them.
Mm-hmm.
So someone with a fixed mindset who doesn't have the emotional intelligence yet to be able to consider that they were part of the reasons, I do this activity with people, and it's a huge red flag to me when all of the reasons for the outcome was just about the other person. Because there's things that we do that contribute, just like, the example I gave
Oh,
about
yeah.
putting the food into the freezer. If
Mm,
I was to debrief that as the victim with a fixed mindset, I would look at it and go, oh, because he's not doing this and he didn't do that and he didn't do this and that. Whereas debriefing it as a big picture, as a collective, I could look at it and go, I saw it 4 days before that and I didn't take action on it, which set him up for failure because it's something that he just doesn't see. It's not on his
mm,
radar. Or, we've spoken before about setting each other up for success, and something we've done is texting before we record. Because I know that sometimes if you're out in your world and doing your life, it's not on
mm-hmm.
your radar. So sending a text brings it into your world and into your radar. And that's how we set each other up for success, right? And
Mm,
so, what I've observed is the difference between someone who has the emotional intelligence to be able to have those conversations is able to, in the reason part, be able to look holistically and see aspects of themselves in that reason. And the
mm,
second thing is that the person with the growth mindset and who is able to learn and grow and have those more higher emotional intelligence or EQ level conversations are the people who can get themselves to the response part of that debrief process, where the response is, I see how this didn't go well for us. How about next time we try this instead?
mm.
That to me is an essential ingredient in that conversation. And if that ingredient's missing, or the person doesn't have the capacity to do that,
Mm.
and it is a recurring pattern, then if we know that it's a recurring pattern and we know that they don't have the capacity to do it and we continue to expect it, guess what? The reason that it's not happening isn't because of them, it's because of us.
Mm.
Because we
And so
can,
sometimes in that respect, and I'm speaking from personal experience, something I'm going through now, is just accept them for the way they are, but doesn't mean you have to engage with them.
that's exactly right. Recognizing they don't have the capacity to show up in the way that you want or desire them to show up.
Mm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's not, that's not a dig, that's not a stab,
No.
that's nothing other than an acknowledgement. So it's an observation. It's an observation a lot of people refuse to have because it can be a painful one. And
Mm.
especially just this morning, we had our Rise and Thrive catch up for the group that just finished a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things that sort of really came to me during that is it's one thing if you're a parent because you can observe how your change and
Mm.
your elevation in consciousness filters down to your children. But for
Mm.
the people who don't have children and who that doesn't filter down to, there's a yearning in them to be the child and to still hear and receive that from the parents.
Okay.
And part of the healing journey, I mean, one of the hardest parts of the healing journey is recognizing that potentially, potentially, you will never hear from your parents what you desired to hear, that you will
Mm.
never receive, or that you will never experience your parents as the parents that you so desperately desired to love and nurture you and be emotionally and psychologically safe.
Mm.
And that can cause a lot of grieving and yearning for that.
Mm.
And so recognizing the impact that us as the cycle breaker, as the ones who are willing to do the work even though it hurts and even though we have to recognize that that might mean, and it's not that we're better than them, it's not nothing else, it's just that we've
It's
made
just
a
a
different
completely
choice.
different experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Generation after
I
generation.
am
Yeah.
so absolutely, and I am so fortunate. It's not lost on me how fortunate I am that my dad and I have those conversations, and that my dad in his 60s, honestly, if you had have asked me 10 years ago, would my dad ever be willing to see this? Would I be able to ever have honest and open conversations with my dad about my childhood? Would I ever be able to be really open and raw and honest and vulnerable with my dad about my experiences and how I experienced those things as in my childhood? The answer would be no way. I would
Mm.
have like put 100% on black, where
Mm.
him doing that would be the red. Like, it was not even in the realm of possibility. And I'm filled with obviously gratitude and hope that people say people don't change. I see it every day, people change.
And that's the
And
awesome
so
thing about it.
I
Yeah.
just continue to hold on to hope for those people whose parents may be very resistant.
Mm.
But
Oh,
yeah,
and look, it's whatever it is that you're going through, whatever it is that you're feeling, it is a uniquely individual journey. And so,
and valid.
yeah, absolutely. And that goes for anyone and everyone, including yourself. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's just about how you respond to it. It's about what you then decide and what your intuition's telling you that you need to do. Because I've got to say that, some people find it difficult to cut people out. I find it's a natural go-to. It's,
Yeah.
so for me, it's learning the opposite, and to sort of, instead of being triggered and then cutting people out. Now, sometimes putting boundaries up is necessary, but it
Yeah.
shouldn't be the first option, which to me, in the past, in my triggered state, it was always the first option. Now,
Yeah.
so really sitting in what it is that can trigger you for that emotion that feels so real, and debriefing it and looking at what it is that you're yearning for. It's actually an invitation. We've said it in the past. The people that trigger
Yeah.
you the most are the ones that are helping you heal the most. Now, it's up
Yes.
to you whether you decide to actually take that opportunity or not, or sit in the victim mindset or fixed mindset. This is what free will is, right? You
That's
get to
right.
decide.
You get to choose.
Yeah. And so you learn the best lessons that way, as brutal and punishing as they feel at the time. in retrospect, you'll then go, So, but yeah, like judgment-wise...
You know what, Dave? I really do believe that people who have gotten up to episode 60 something of our podcast, if they are still listening to us rambling on about
Jesus,
all the
well
topics
done.
from well done, yes.
Yeah.
But also when I hear you say you, as in speaking to our listeners, I reckon if they've made it this far, then absolutely this is their path. I mean, someone doesn't get to episode 60 something of a podcast or even find themselves here. I mean, like, where are we? We're 35 or 37 minutes or something through this episode. I would even go as far to say that if you've made it this far through the episode, then 100% you're on the path. Your soul is calling you to this journey, and that you're here for a reason, and you're listening to us for a reason. You found us for a reason. And
you're either resonating or you're soothing,
really,
one of the two.
That's exactly right. And someone who's soothing and someone who's not resonating is sitting through a 37-minute podcast episode and still listening to us ramble. So I think it's really cool. And, yeah, absolutely. And also honouring and acknowledging them and the courage that it takes to be willing to have these conversations and looking at these things. And something that came up for me as you were just talking then is you said the emotion that feels so real. It's not the emotion that feels real. The emotion is real. Emotion is a chemical reaction in your body. If we were doing live blood monitoring and live monitoring of all of your biochemistry, we would see the physiological response of emotion in your body.
Yeah,
and this is why it baffles me so much when we almost like gaslight people and try and convince them that what they're feeling isn't right or isn't real, because it is real. It's happening in their body. And so rather than judging or making it wrong, instead coming at it from the perspective of, wow, this emotion is real for them. I can see that it's happening, regardless of if it's right or if it's wrong or if it's rational or reasonable. Let's seek first to understand what is their experience. And then my sort of take on it is, wow, if that were real, that would really hurt. And then instead of trying to convince them, just asking questions. And what would what would you be seeing or feeling? What evidence would you be looking for? With the example of you don't love me. If that were true, that would really hurt. I can so understand why that emotion is coming up if that's how you're seeing this and what your mind is presenting to you as truth. And then trying to understand of what would you be seeing or hearing to observe a different truth? If you were feeling really loved, what would that look like? Like, what evidence would you be seeing in your environment? And they'll say, well, you'll use lowercase letters instead of uppercase when you text me. Or like, and that's as silly. And I use the extreme of silly
as a response.
Yeah, I use the extreme end of a silly example to demonstrate a point. To demonstrate the point that quite often our mind is playing these unconscious games where the person who guesses the games your mind is playing the best wins. Whereas when we bring open and vulnerable conversation and communication to this, it takes away the guessing game and the unconscious biases and interpretations to things. Because, I mean, you and I have both been in situations, and I would struggle to find a single human on the planet who hasn't, but you and I have both been in situations where it's kind of like, well, I feel like what you've done has been highly accusatory. And that's not resonating with my version of truth. And it's...
Oh, and I guess that's what it comes down to. It's like, and for my specific situation at the moment, it's when you bring that curiosity into what they're feeling. And my favourite term that I say to myself and others, that if it wasn't this, what else could it be? So it's sort of like, imagine that person is attacking you. Then to myself, I'm saying to myself, if they're not attacking me, what else could it be? Right? So it tries to somewhat effectively disarm the emotion that's coming up for me. And then I talk to the other person. If what you're seeing is not that, what else could it be? Just be open to it. I don't have the answer for you, but what else could it be? Because it shows dogma at its highest. Because when you ask someone, or you ask yourself that question and you come up blank, you are so invested in that. It's not funny. So the curiosity, and we've said it in the past, that when you're curious about how you feel or how you're acting or whatever it is, you can't be curious and triggered at the same time. Yeah. It is just simple. It's like,
because it requires the access to the top of the brain. It's that simple.
Yeah. And so when you can do that, then you can start to sort of go, okay, you can acknowledge and you can honour yourself to sort of say, I feel this triggered. I feel hurt. But acting from that is a completely different thing. And I guess it's sort of then going, okay, at what point does this mindset become toxic? And I say that when it comes to, if you allow it constantly within a relationship with a person and you keep on going, well, there's something within you that says you can't detach from this person. You need this and you'll accept this beyond what's healthy for you. However, if it's your first reaction that you just need to detach, that's also unhealthy, because you will only engage with people so long as you're not feeling triggered. So it's having that nice balance. And it's also knowing, and this is where you need to be intuitively led, because throughout this triggering, throughout all of this, there's absolute fucking nuggets of gold for you to find in there, through the brutality, through the pain and through the hurt, that are uniquely for you, that you will find in it.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So, and I often, I see this with people who self-advocate for, or you know, like, have the perspective that they're very proud of their strong boundaries, but their strong boundaries are just culling people. They cut them off. You're dead to me. Cross me and you're gone. And there's a perspective that that's a strong boundary. And I would argue as to say that that's not a strong boundary at all. It's a defense mechanism. It's a
100%.
It's a self-preservation. Because a boundary allows the curiosity and the presence of imperfection, but sort of says, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm not going to come to that really shitty party. I have no interest in showing up. So cutting people off constantly, the thing that amazes me, I look at it and go, I would not even have that many people in my life that I could cut off, and these people seem to be cutting people off every week. And I'm like, I would not even have that many people in my world. And so when I look at that and I go, why are so many people coming towards this person or these people to consistently be cutting people off? And it's because the lesson is, you stop cutting people off and actually start to explore the invitation for healing that's coming up for you. And sometimes the boundary does look like creating space. But if we create the space without journeying, do I know how to healthily communicate? Do I know how to healthily uphold a boundary? Do I even have the self-awareness to know what I need? Do I know how to invite the self-awareness and the self-reflection and the curiosity in the other person so that we can come closer together through this experience instead of further apart? Until those things are explored, the cold black and white cutoff method is not a healthy boundary. It's
agreed.
Wounding.
Agreed.
Yeah. So fascinating chat today.
We'll be interested to see
Fascinating.
what we
I've
talk
already
about
got an
next
idea
week.
for our next episode.
All right. Well, on that
And it's
note,
something you
people.
mentioned, I think, within the first 2 minutes of this one. So,
Ooh, okay. I'm keen
yeah,
to hear
you
it next
already
week.
forgot what you said.
Oh, look, yeah, pretty much. I did a lot of talking this episode, so.
Well,
But
I
I'd
was
say
very grateful
people.
because do you know what? Sorry, you've tried to close this off twice now, but I observed as we were chatting that the banging in the background. Did you observe that it stopped?
Yes. Yes.
Well, here's why.
Mute button.
Because I actually communicated, hey, not
Oh,
sure if you realize that I'm recording a podcast episode. Will that be going on for much longer? And I got a response saying, I'll stop. And that's how easy it is. Because if I didn't
nice.
say that, I would have got to the end of it and gone, oh, how inconsiderate.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
this is how we
Good
set
job.
ourselves up for success. So, perfect example that played out in
Nice.
real time as we were recording this.
Well done.
Sometimes we make assumptions that stop us from taking action, and that action was just simply communicating instead of making an assumption that they knew what we were doing and were interrupting it on purpose because
And
jerks.
communicating in a way that you're not triggered, or communicating in a way where you're before the heightened feeling. You know, it's that bottle
Yeah.
until it blows up. Anyway, third time lucky. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you listening. Subscribe button doesn't cost you anything. Like button helps the algorithm. Amazing chat, Ash. Catch you next week.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.